Hello everyone and a warm welcome to In Conversation with Trevor. Now today I'm speaking to a journalist, an entrepreneur and a patriotic Zimbabwean. A person you know very well because he's usually sitting where I am right now. Our guest is none other than Trevor Ncube. Trevor Ncube, welcome to your show. This time on the other side, how does that feel?
It feels strange, Farai. Feels very strange, but thank you for organizing this conversation. Thank you.
Great, and congratulations on the milestone.
It's a huge milestone. 25 years since we set up the Zimbabwe Independent. I've been reflecting, and sometimes it's very easy to say, you know, time flies when you're having fun, but looking back over 25 years, a lot of things have happened. I mean, the excitement of starting, tremendous excitement, the pain that we experience at times, you know, operating in an environment that very hostile to independent media, tears, excitement, ups and downs. Yeah, when I was told we're turning 25, I mean, it's not always top of mind. It invites you to go back to 1996 and how we started. And if you asked me then, would we be here 25 years? There were times when I thought maybe we wouldn't make it, but by God's grace, here we are.
Let's go back to 1996, as you just mentioned. You were editor of the Financial Gazette, which at the time was the pinnacle financial and business publication. But you left. Under what circumstances?
I was fired. I didn't leave. I was fired, and I was fired because I'd had run-ins with my publisher and proprietor, Elias Rusike, who was convinced that I had a vendetta against Robert Mugabe. And he had written me a number of memos to tone down on my criticism, on the Financial Gazette's criticism of Robert Mugabe and ZANU-PF. People remember that this was a time when ZANU-PF and Robert Mugabe, first of all, ZANU-PF was pushing a one-party state. Robert Mugabe was pushing one-man rule. And the Financial Gazette at that time stood up against all those two things, the one-party state and the one-man rule of Robert Mugabe. So I stood out like a sore thumb, you know, as far as Robert Mugabe was concerned and ZANU-PF was concerned. I actually recall a number of people coming to me, who'd come to me and say, "Why are you doing this? Why are you appearing to be one of the few who are opposing this?" And for me, it was a matter of principle. It was a matter of conscience. I had seen the damage that one-party state rule and one-man rule had done, and I could see the potential that Robert Mugabe had to take us down to where we are right now. But a lot of people back then thought that I was absolutely crazy, that were sponsored by the imperialists to stand up against ZANU-PF and Robert Mugabe. So yeah, so I then got dismissed. It was a very painful episode of my life, to be dismissed and told to go home. And I stayed home for about 3 months. I started looking for jobs in South Africa and in Zimbabwe. What do I do? Interestingly, I always say to people that if you've never been fired, you'll never know who are your real friends. Yeah. The phone doesn't ring. You sit there and you say, "I'm Trevor Ncube, I was editor of the Financial Gazette." Lots of people that I know, the phone will ring. The phone never rang. And that teaches you a lesson about life. and who are your friends. And yeah, I learned that lesson. 3 months, it took three months for me to sort of try and figure out what it is that I wanted to do. When I was pretty desperate, I was told that Clive Murphy and Clive Wilson actually saw my being fired from the Financial Gazette as an opportunity to introduce a new publication. So I called Clive Murphy, and Clive said, I was expecting this call. And to cut a long story short, we met at the Harare Club 3-4 times, and they were determined that they wanted to start another weekly paper. We debated what it was going to be called. Eventually, we settled on the Zimbabwe Independent. Then on May 10, we launched with 13, initially 7 members of staff. And Clive Murphy was determined that it would be 7, but I pushed hard to 13, and I was given the mandate to decide the editorial thrust of the Zimbabwe Independent.
How easy was that? I mean, you've just been fired from a big job, been accused of standing up and as you said, being a sore thumb against the establishment. Did you think you'd succeed?
I had no doubt that we would succeed, because whilst a lot of people questioned what we were doing, questioned what I was doing, my stance on against what ZANU-PF was doing and what Robert Mugabe was doing, I saw that there was an audience. There were people that valued democracy, freedom of expression, an independent media, freedom of assembly, and multi-party democracy, and that those people would support us. And also that one thing that we stood for was a market-based economy, and that business would support that kind of publication. And we were an instant success. I mean, we 6 months into after opening the doors of the Zimbabwe Independent, we were profitable, and I'd been offered 2.5% a stake in the business, and I got a dividend in 6 months. In 6 months, was able to buy another 2.5%. And at the end of the year, I got another dividend and managed to increase my stake in the publication. So I think also, Farai, what's interesting was there's something to be said about the 3 of us going out in business, which I think to a lot of people out there has lessons. The 3 of us were people that had created a reputation in the industry. Let me say the 4 of us actually: Clive Murphy, Clive Wilson, Sarah Thompson, and myself. Sarah Thompson was perhaps the advertising and marketing guru in Zimbabwe. Clive Murphy, respected as a publisher. Clive Wilson, respected as the former editor of the Financial Gazette, and myself. We actually got paid up front by advertisers and subscribers. So we were funded upfront by subscribers and advertisers. And in a short space of time, the business had enough money to buy our own printing press. So we offered something to the market, and the market was prepared to underwrite what we were doing.
Were you concerned? I mean, the fact that you partnered with these 3 individuals who were white, you are black, wasn't that feeding into the narrative that, had already been established, that you were anti-ZANU-PF? At the time, also, this is when the anti-white sentiment was starting to pick up.
I think in life, if you're going to be focused on what are people going to say, you'll never be able to do anything. So for me, I would hear those murmurs, but for me, what was important was what was in my heart. What is it that I was out to do? Why was I doing what I was doing? Did I deliberately look out for those 3 white people, or circumstances had forced me to be in partnership with these people? So for me, it's fundamentally important. I mean, I don't always listen to what people say. I listen to my conscience, I listen to my inner voice, and I proceed. regardless of what people say. It was an issue that some people tried to use against us, particularly in ZANU-PF. For he's in partnership with white people, he's being used by the Brits and the Americans. That's something that I've carried most of my life. But inside of me, I know what it is that I'm passionate about. I love this country. I'm perhaps more patriotic than a lot of people. And I realized just how important it was to have an independent media in this country, an independent publication and a group of newspapers that would be a partner in Zimbabwe's economic and political development, as opposed to the ruling ZANU-PF that saw independent media as the enemy of the state.
How bad was that, perception?
It was pretty bad. It was pretty bad to the extent that, we were, for instance, give you an example, still happening right now. You're not invited to state occasions. You're not invited to state press conferences. You're seen as an enemy. You are seen as an enemy. And there are dog whistles out there for people to come and get you. There was an instant, prior to me being fired from the Financial Gazette, we had run a story on Robert Mugabe's marriage to Grace. I got arrested because, the president disputed it. A judge disputed that they were present in this marriage of Grace and so forth. So I got arrested for that and spent some time for that kind of thing. But the height of it was my colleague, who was the editor of The Standard, Mark Chavunduka, who was abducted. For 7 days, we didn't know where Mark was, Mark Chavunduka. And the crime that Mark Chavunduka has committed as the editor of The Standard, a sister publication to the Zimbabwe Independent, was to publish a story that said there had been an attempted army mutiny because of the opposition to the war in the DRC by members of the army. And that's a story that upset the establishment so much that the military intelligence, CIO and so forth, put up this scheme where they abducted Mark Chavunduka and his deputy editor, Ray Choto, and they were disappeared for 7 days. We didn't know where they were. I was the first person who saw Maya, who saw Mark. Maya is my daughter. I was the first person who saw Mark Chavunduka when he was released. I went to his home in Mount Pleasant. I've never seen a man as frightened he was. And he was telling me what they'd done to him. Torture, electric shocks to his private parts, beating him under his bare feet, putting wet sack around his head, sitting in a dark room, dragging him in the mud behind a truck and so forth. That's just how intolerant Robert Mugabe and those who were around him were to an independent media in Zimbabwe. It's important to realize that we are where we are because of that culture. Robert Mugabe was not just a person, he was a system, he was a culture. Most of the leadership that we have right now are a product of that culture. And it's not going to be easy for them to suddenly change from the overalls that Robert Mugabe put on them and become Democrats, because the thing that they've known all along has been this intolerance, and they're not just going to be born again. They're not going to be born again and become people who love the independent media. We're still not invited to state press conferences. You have to fight for our people, for our guys to be invited to state functions. That mindset has not changed.
And yet, you still went on. How do you convince reporters that despite the threat of this happening to you, we still need to put this publication out?
I think the most heartwarming thing is being part of a team that puts country first. And that was the team that we had at the Zimbabwe Independent. Put country first, patriotic, understood why we were doing what we were doing. Actually, sometimes I, as editor-in-chief, would have to slow them down, slow them down, because they're so passionate. They see the wrong, they see the abuse, and they can't be quietened when they see the wrong and see the abuse. What dictators don't realize is that there's a lot of people on the continent, in Zimbabwe, who don't need to be told by the West what human rights is, respecting human rights, the importance of press freedom, the importance of freedom of assembly and so forth. Those are basic rights that the people in the newsroom wanted the majority of Zimbabweans to enjoy. So it didn't matter what threats they were facing. I mean, Mark Chavunda, it didn't matter what threats they were facing. What they wanted to do was to tell the story that they were witnessing. They were eyewitnesses to abuse of human rights. And all that they wanted to do was to participate in shining the light on those abuses, in giving voice to the masses that wanted to be given the voice to express themselves. It's a natural thing to speak out, to be heard, to go where you want to go without being hindered. And these journalists represented that amazing culture and the passion for our country.
The AMH group now, as it stands, could you tell us about the ownership structure? Because there has been speculation that you've sold part of the stake to those imperialists you made mention of earlier, the Americans. Talk to us about the ownership.
So the 1996, we started Zimbabwe Independent, with me, like I said, owning 2.5%. By 2000, the year 2000, I owned 100% of the company, at which point we had the Standard and the Zimbabwe Independent, so it was just two titles. And then 2000, when we decided to launch the Newsday, the company required funding. So I sold 39% of the equity to raise money to start Newsday, to buy a printing press. And we sold to an American fund, the Media Development Investment Fund. So as we launched the Newsday, bought the printing press, MDIF, the Media Development Investment Fund, owned 39% of the business then. The Newsday, the Zimbabwe Independent, the Standard, and the printing press. And that remained so for the longest time. The Media Development Investment Fund were also my partners in South Africa. In South Africa, I owned 76% of the MNG, and they owned 10 plus, or they're about 20% of the MNG, if I recall well. So they were my partners, and our understanding has always been that they don't get involved in editorial matters, in as much as I do not get involved in editorial matters. And by the way, people can Google Media Development Investment Fund and see who they are. They are invested. They invest in media throughout the world, as it were. So they could not interfere, because they don't do that. They're looking at the numbers, and very invested in editorial independence. But we are in a process right now where they are exiting the business, and hence the talk that Trevor has offloaded to certain people who are being, names are being dropped all over the place. The truth is that there is no transaction that has been concluded as far as that stake is concerned. I've had discussions with a number of people that are interested. And as happens with these issues, there's confidentiality. There's you want to disclose at the appropriate time, with when you're sure that the discussions are going in a direction in which you'd want them to go. You don't want to jeopardize discussions by disclosing before it's appropriate to do that. So there's no deal that has been concluded. There's discussions that are taking place. MDIF are on their way out. We're
Any particular reason why?
Because they've been in the business for a long time. They feel that it's time for them to exit, but it's also part of the arrangement that I did when I partly exited MNG, that they were going to exit the site. So it's a back-to-back transaction. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned some of the highlights. 6 months after starting up the publication, you were already profitable, had been able to turn a profit. From an economic and commercial point of view, how easy was it to start up a venture like that? Greenfield, you're competing against very established players, and in a market like Zimbabwe, how easy was it?
It's when you look back, it was actually relatively easy compared to the environment that we have right now. We had financial institutions that were in a position to give us facilities before we went into business. I was myself able to walk across a bank and ask for a loan to buy my 2.5%, which I then quickly paid. But also the advertising industry was very vibrant. Point number one. Number two, the members of the public had the cash to spend on buying the newspapers. We opened our door with a target of selling 10,000 papers. It didn't take a long time before we were selling 25,000 papers, and all of them were being sold, and we had competition for that matter. So the economy was in a relatively robust space. People had cash in their back pockets. Businesses were able to advertise, and they also understood the importance of advertising. The negative was we're not able to. It took us a long time to get advertising from parastatals and government departments. There was a whispering campaign, that you must not support them and so forth, until they realized that we had the audience that they wanted, and if they wanted to reach that audience, they had to come along and advertise with us. We were also the first newspaper, by the way, to be on the internet in Zimbabwe. And we're the first newspaper to have a website and have a huge audience on the internet. So there was a lot that was going for the economy that allowed businesses to start. There was a lot of economic activity that supported what we were doing. So it was a good time. It was a good time.
Along the way, economically, there have been a lot of depressions, a lot of challenges. And given where we are now, you've made mention of circulations. Target of 10,000, you were selling a lot more than that. Now, given what's happened with the digital revolution, given what's happening with the economy, are you worried, or are you certain about the environment that you're operating in now?
What I'm certain about is that good journalism will still have a space. Doesn't matter where you go. Quality journalism will still have a space in any society. Investigative journalism will continue to be in demand. In an environment where we are, where there's a glut of fake news, you will begin to see, and it's already beginning to happen, people looking for quality establishment, people looking for quality content, verified content. In an environment where most of these platforms has been seen globally, have now become propagators of fake news, deliberate fake news, deep fake and that kind of stuff. We are seeing audiences walking back to quality. We're seeing audiences prepared to pay for quality. So I'm not concerned about the state of journalism. I think good quality journalism, let me rephrase that. This good quality journalism will always have a space. Commoditized journalism might face a problem. Commoditized journalism is journalism that competes against Twitter, WhatsApp and Facebook. That will have a problem. But analysis, deep commentary, investigative pieces, opinion pieces, stuff that challenges the way people think, people's perceptions and so forth, that is going to continually be in demand. And that's the challenge that journalism faces. Do you stand up and give that quality audience for you to be, quality content for you to be able to survive? That's going to be the challenge.
Some observations I've heard are that the quality, the type of journalists that we have today is not comparable to the one that was in your era and perhaps at the time that you started the Zimbabwe.
You know, the other thing that people don't know about me is that I'm not a trained journalist. I never went to journalism school. I taught myself how to write. And also, I'm dyslexic. I can't spell to save my life. I can't spell. So for me, it's by God's grace that I'm doing what I'm doing. Why am I saying that? I think we used to be very proud of our work ethic as Zimbabweans, all across the board, banking, financial services, medical, and so forth. Sadly, you can't say that anymore. So for me, I think it's important that as we point the finger at the quality of journalism in this country, let's look at the quality all across the country, okay? Look at the quality of service you get when you get into a supermarket. Look at the quality of service you get when you get in a combi. Look at the quality of service you get when you get into a hospital. Our country is not where it was when some of us got into business. The work ethic that we used to be proud of is gone. The respect for education that we used to be proud of has been severely eroded. So naturally, that is an effect on the quality of the journalism, because the journalists are not an island. They are not an island. They are a product of the whole society. Our society at the present moment is in a terrible state, where a lot of our values have been compromised, where the things that, for instance, if you are going to encourage people to beat up people because they disagree with them, if you're going to encourage people to invade somebody's property, somebody's factory because they don't agree with them, if you're going to celebrate theft, as we have seen happening in the past, what motivation do people have to work? Okay? What motivation do people have to work hard and go to school and get qualified if the role models are the thieves around us? So journalism has a tendency to reflect the kind of society that we're living in, and our journalism is in a sad state because our country is in a sad state.
The focus is the Zimbabwean, but I cannot resist asking you, are we ever going to fix this?
You know, it's I've had people sit in this chair and I ask them that question, are we ever going to be able to fix this? It's going to be tough, but I believe we can if we start at the right place. I think you and I are write-offs. But maybe your kids and my kids have an opportunity to rescue this country. For me, that's where the hope lies. Mm-hmm. We have poisoned the young generation. We have set terrible values and terrible standards. For me, my passion and my hope and my prayer is that we get a cadre of leaders that put country first and are determined to work hard to ensure that your kids and my kids get a better country than we have right now. I think the leadership that's going to change this country, I doubt that leadership is here right now, because I don't see that leadership. I think it's going to be leadership that's going to be a deliberate project of saying, let's get young people, let's begin to train them, infuse in them that freedom of expression is important, democracy is important, property rights are important, human rights are important, respect for life is important. For me, the thing that breaks my heart is just driving around town and seeing how disrespectful we are of each other. Okay? I mean, how can we build a society when we don't respect each other, when we don't give space to each other, when we don't listen to each other, when we talk at each other, not to each other? We've got a big problem. But I have hope, not in you and I, but in the next generation.
You are a member, or you are appointed to the Presidential Advisory Council, PAC. Do you share these sentiments in those meetings? And what has become of it? Has it been of any value? Has it delivered anything in your view?
Well, so before saying anything, I must say that obviously there is the Official Secrets Act that precludes me, otherwise I'll get into big trouble. That precludes me from sharing specifics. But I would say to a large extent, PAC has played a positive role. But by nature, the PAC cannot stand on rooftops and make noises about the stuff that it's been able to do behind closed doors. But I'm sure one day when history is written and the stuff that the PAC has been sending to the president is declassified, a lot of people will realize just how effective, how useful, the PAC has been. Is it a perfect organization? No organization is perfect at all. Has it been able to make an impact, make some inroads? I would say to some extent it has.
So we'll wait for that future date you made mention
Right.
of declassification. Coming back to the subject of the day, and I think this, you just mentioned, some of the challenges that we face in this country, and the media industry for a long time has been viewed as a boys' club. Zimbabwe has appointed its first female editor. However, there has been, I would say backlash is the right word, but certainly, some attacks, some trolling on social media of that editor, Faith Zaba. What do you have to say to that?
Well, it was very unfortunate. First of all, let me say just how proud we are of Faith, and what she's been able to do to continue to fly the flag of professionalism, of sticking to facts, and really representing the profession in a very proud manner. But I'm not proud of the way in which the industry or certain people received her when her appointment was made. And she's a strong person, she's a strong woman. She was able to withstand that. But there was a time when some of it was hurtful, even to me and to us as an organization. But we stood with her and supported her. And she has proven us to be right, in that she was the right person to get the job. I think Farai, that response that she got is a reflection of the kind of society that we are. There is a tendency in our society to not to respect women, not to respect our mothers and sisters, and not to believe in them. And that response, I think, came from that space. But there's also generally a pull him down syndrome. We don't celebrate each other. We don't often celebrate each other. And that, to me, goes back to the question that you asked: how are we ever going to change this? When we begin to celebrate Farai for his success, and it becomes a normal thing to say to somebody, well done, not always to be looking out for how do I drag this person down. So Faith, unfortunately, was a victim of that. We need to pull her down, we need to destroy her, which is a very sad thing, because by pulling somebody down, you don't lift yourself up, sadly.
Sadly. Now, some may say, look, Faith, yes, she is now the editor, but she's just one woman. The Zimbabwe, the AMH group, what else has it done to try and make sure that female journalists come up?
We've been guilty of not doing as much as we should have done in the past. But this is now an issue that's very important for us in ensuring that gender diversity becomes front and center of everything that we're doing. So, and having Faith around to sitting around the table, giving her views regarding the issue of gender diversity, because sometimes until you put a woman in the room, this perspective from the woman is not had.
It's not there, yeah.
So that's been a beginning. Fortunately, within our the Alpha Media editorial advisory board, we have a majority of women. If I'm not there's a significant representation of women in the advisory board, which is chaired by Muchade Ashton Masunda. So we're prioritizing the importance of gender diversity going forward. I must confess, we've been guilty of not paying attention to this very important matter until now.
Well, Trevor, we do know that at one point you ventured down south, took ownership of the Mail and Guardian. Would you say that perhaps for that period your focus was more on that baby as opposed to the one you had birthed here in Zimbabwe?
I think naturally, when I took over the Mail and Guardian in July 2002, the business was losing lots of money. So it required my hands-on attention. So it's possible that inadvertently, the initial 2 or 3 or so years, I might have focused my attention more on the Mail and Guardian rather than the business down the side. But I always made sure that we had good management, we had good people that were running the business at any given point. And I was down here quite often, not just that, through technology and stuff, was able to continue to give the kind of guidance, leadership and support that the business required. So I wouldn't say I completely took my eyes off. I was more perhaps slightly hands-off because the other business required more of me, as it were.
I read an opinion piece you wrote in December 2017, I think, when you moved out of Mail and Guardian and then came back to focus here, which was full of lessons that I think you learned from that adventure. One of the key things there was the Mail and Guardian Africa, which was, I think, an idea to set up a Pan-African media house to tell the African story. Because that didn't work, do you think that that's still a viable?
Absolutely. I think more important now than it has ever been. We can't be a people that consumes content about us produced by other people. We complain about the way we are covered by big foreign broadcasters, how we're perceived by newspapers, by foreign newspapers. That is never going to change because they have a certain market that they are writing for. They're not writing for us, they're writing for that market. And so that bias is not going to change. That bias is going to change when we as Africans begin to tell our story. And it's the story of how we live and not how we die. Unfortunately, foreign broadcasters, foreign publishers, newspapers are interested in the story of how we kill each other, how we die, how we starve, how we mess up things. I am passionate about telling the story of how we live, the good stories that are in all of us as Africans. So I still believe that the perception of the African continent is only going to change when we've got big African media that are telling and projecting the stories to the African audience. Your kids and my kids will begin to have confidence as Africans when they begin to see themselves on the screens projected in a manner that reflects who they are, not in a manner that reflects who somebody thinks they are. So I still believe, as I did when I ventured into introduce MNG Africa, headquartered in Nairobi, that that's still an important thing to do. Our narrative is going to be changed by us rather than anybody else. And we must stop complaining about how CNN and BBC are covering us, because how they cover us is they're not doing it for us. They're doing it for themselves and their audiences. Let's do something to change that narrative by owning our own media.
Do you think that the AMH has done enough of telling a positive story of Zimbabwe?
I think it's for me, what's important is, do we tell a balanced story? Do we tell an objective story? Do we tell the good stories and the bad stories? Do we write about corruption? Do we write about success? Do we write about the good things that are happening in the country? And unfortunately, there's a tendency to, not just at AMH, state-controlled media and so forth, to obsess more about negative things rather than the positive things. I think we fail there as journalists, and that applies to all of us. We fail ourselves, we fail the nation by not making an effort to go for the good stories, the stories that are uplifting, the stories that are inspirational. You know, I've been saying for a long time that scandals do sell newspapers, yes, but the good stories do sell newspapers too. People love reading stories that are affirming, that are inspirational, and for me, that has been proven to be right because of this show. In Conversation with Trevor, started primarily because of my passion to seek out the people that have lived impactful lives and to share those stories. And the following has just confirmed that there is an audience, and it's a quality audience. It's a quality audience that is after those kind of stories. If you want the masses that want corruption, scandals, and that's something else. But I think I'm at a time in my life where it's important to do the things that matter and do them well. And what I would say to our journalists, you know, whether they be the state-controlled or private media, is that we've got a role to expose corruption, mismanagement, and all the bad things. But our much more important role is to affirm each other, to inspire each other, to give hope in hopeless circumstances. We don't do enough of that. There is money in doing that, and we need to do more of that.
Now, Trevor, you've just mentioned, making money, and I think, obviously these ventures are set up to make profit. How do you balance, and particularly in an environment like Zimbabwe, where the economy has shrunk, they are sparse, advertisers are sparse, a story that could potentially alienate sponsors or advertisers, but is the truth and it's a hard-hitting story. Do you still go with it? Or is there temptation to say, you know what, at the end of the day, we need to pay salaries. We need to put food on the table. And so perhaps let's not go after it as aggressively as we ought to.
Jay, I think that's an important question that you ask. And it's one that, maybe let me start by saying that, I have never gone into any venture because of the profit motive. I've gone into, maybe that's why I'm not a billionaire or a multimillionaire. I've never gone into ventures because it's going to make money. I think that's the wrong way of doing things. And if you do that, then you are going to come across the difficult questions and you'll not be able to deal with them. For me, it's always been, why do we do what we do? I preach about this to the team. Why do we do what we do? We do what we do because we love this country. We're passionate about this country. We want media. We want our journalism to be impactful. It's great to make money so that we pay salaries, but let's remain focused on why we do what we do. So if company X is going to come and say, if you publish a story, therefore we're not going to advertise, we very often say, go away, keep your money. And that's happened so many times. We've been punished by the government. We've been punished by advertisers. We've been punished by the public when we disagree with them. But guess what? They all come around and say, you were right. The most important thing is to do the things that we're passionate about and believe in them. And we sleep with a clear conscience, knowing that we tend money away, but if we had accepted that money, we would have compromised our principles. So we have had instances where quoted companies want to dictate to us in terms of how they ought to be covered, and say, no, go away. We're not going to bend over backwards to accommodate your dictatorial tendencies. Because it's interesting how the private sector has no problems with being dictatorial, but when they look at government, they criticize government for being dictatorial. So for me, and generally the team, we're very clear. I mean, there's some times when I remember running the title, the Zimbabwe Independent, where people would come and say, oh, but this advertiser says A, B, C, D, if we don't, and I'll stand my ground. That's where it's important to have the proprietor who believes in what you believe in, the editor who believes in what you believe in, a chairman who believes in what you believe in, and you stand your ground. Guess what? You stand your ground on principle, people respect you. You give in and compromise on important things because of money. What are they going to be telling everybody else? We made them change because they wanted our money. It's not the kind of gossip that I want to go around town.
On that as well, and I suppose taking you back to your 1996 days where there was influence coming from the publisher, you are on record as saying that you are not your papers and your papers are not you. Again, going back to that opinion piece, you said, editorial independence is paramount to you. You don't interfere with the duties of journalists and editors. Some people may find that hard to believe because we know people who've owned companies, who've been there for the lifetime that it's been alive and still call the shots.
For me, I think what makes me different, and I'm proud of my record when it comes to that, is that I've been an editor before. I know what it feels like. I've been in the newsroom before. I know what it feels like when an editor spikes your story for reasons which are not professional, which are not ethical. I know what it is like to be fired because you've done the right thing. I know what interference is like as far as editors are concerned. So I made a decision long back that I wouldn't do that. But what helped me in making that decision was I read a book by Graham, the owner of Catherine Graham, the owner of the Washington Post. It's a book that I think every journalist should read, which she talks about how her husband ran the Washington Post before she took over, and how she ran the Washington Post and the difference and so forth. And after reading that book, I said, this is the way I would want to run a media organization. Completely hands off. Employ professional people to make the decision. What I'm there is to back them up. I am a reader like every other reader. I see the papers when they hit the streets. If I've got any criticism, I make the criticism just like any reader. I make the call afterwards like any reader in matters of facts and facts and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, my track record in South Africa, the Mail and Guardian, speaks for itself. My track record here speaks for itself. I do not interfere. I interfere when afterwards, when I do see that there's been mistakes that have been made. Journalists are very interesting people because they have no problems with making mistakes on the front page. When it comes to apologizing, they want to hide that. That I dislike, you know. Let's make our mistakes on page one. Let's own up the mistakes on page one. And we must be, for us to be trusted by the public must know that when we make mistakes, we own up. Again, it's that kind of practice that earns you respect as far as the members are concerned. But sometimes we as journalists have a tendency to think that if we apologize, it shows that we are weak and lily-livered. And actually the truth is the opposite. When you make a mistake and you apologize, you earn the trust of the public. But don't make a habit of making mistakes.
Indeed. Now, Trevor, obviously the media landscape has been changing more rapidly now than it has in the past. Do you think that the AMH group is responding quickly enough to cope with those changes?
We have not responded as fast as we would have wanted, obviously because of resources. Because going digital is a great thing, but software, platforms, this is very expensive stuff. But we're doing the best that we can to move the business into that space. Well, what is interesting for me has been that digital, being digital first, is something that we've been preaching for quite a long time. But what's interesting for me is that we had three headwinds. It was not fully embraced internally because the newspaper print was still there.
Yes.
And when you have the majority of the people in the newsroom being print people, it takes time for them to embrace digital. So there was that resistance there. There was resistance from the advertiser. The advertiser wanted to see, and some of them still do, want to see the advert in print and not digital. And I mean, for the longest time we said we've got the largest audience on the internet, but who reads that? So you have a problem with the advertiser. The reader, it's taken time for people. It's COVID that has helped both the internal opposition to digital first, the opposition from the advertiser, the opposition from the reader. The reader. The media having made the mistake of giving content for free, to turn around and say, we've given this content to you for free for 10, 20 years since the internet came in, you now need to pay. The reader was not prepared to pay, but that has changed. I mean, we are seeing the trends right now. The New York Times, the Financial Times, The Economist, the large chunk of their revenues are now coming from subscriptions rather than advertising. That tells you that the reader, rather than the advertiser, has become much more important. That is the model that is going to make journalism and our business sustainable. Advertising is pretty fickle. The subscriber, the reader, once they get into liking the brand, they tend to have more staying power than the advertiser. There's a tendency also, as far as the corporates are concerned, when things are bad, the first thing that gets cut is advertising. But the reader might still have a bit of money in their back pockets to support you. So here is the thing, like I said, good journalism will always have people that support it. We've seen a trend in the West where when newspapers are in trouble, as they have been, there's been closures of newspapers throughout the world, where communities come in and take over newspapers. Why? Because they want school sports results to be reported, ward politics, community issues, council issues to be reported. So the local communities come in and take newspapers because they realize the importance of good journalism that's relevant, that's engaged. That's the journalism that's going to survive. I think it's important to make a distinction between the platforms and the content. Okay, the platforms are going to change.
Yep.
You know, the railway, the road, the pipe, or whatever. But what you put in there is what matters at the end of the day.
Talking about, you know, those relevant, those community-based stories, we know that in Southern Eye, some of these other ventures are things that AMH has come up with and innovated. But again, in Zimbabwe, there's still this sense, not just in the media, but that Zimbabwe is Harare.
Yeah. Bamba Zonke. That's very true. And it was the thinking that drove us to start Southern Eye as a standalone product, to emphasize the point that the southern region mattered as much as Bamba Zonke Harare does. We need to do more of that. We need to, and this is where, for me, it becomes important for the government of the day to come in terms of empowering communities and empowering community-owned publications, community-owned radio stations, because information is power. It's not just political. Unfortunately, our government has a tendency to see information only as a political tool and as a political weapon. But knowing where you get the good prices for your bambaira, where you get the good prices for your tomatoes and that kind of stuff, and you know, all stuff that's related to your immediate environment is important, and that can be done by small community radio station, small community, newspapers or whatever. We need to see the government of the day doing that, and change that mindset that says our people ought to be free to speak out. Don't be afraid of what people say. Do not be afraid of ideas. Nations and societies that have developed are nations and society that have empowered their people to be creative, to think freely and create the kind of world-class products and services and companies that we're seeing. But nations like ours, where people are afraid to think, afraid to be creative because of the repercussions of doing that, that has an effect all across the board, not just on politics. It's going to affect on how creative am I going to be in the industry that I'm in. The societies that succeed are societies that cherish ideas, encourage different thinking. Societies that succeed are societies that encourage a competitive market of ideas, competitive market of ideas, where the best ideas in politics, in business, in innovation succeed. Our society is not that kind of society. No wonder why we are where we are.
As we head towards wrapping up, I mean, we've just spoken about 25 years. It flew by. And as you said, there have been pains, there have been joys along the way. Looking forward to the next 25 years.
You know, I'm very passionate about us as Africans creating institutions, building institutions that last long after we're gone. So instead of the tradition handed over to us by our fathers of Ncube and Associates, where Ncube and Associates goes the moment Trevor goes, is something that we need to bring to an end. So for me, Alpha Media Holdings is an attempt at creating an institution that's going to live long after I am gone. And as far as I'm concerned, we're just starting. We're just starting. And I'm excited about what's in the horizon in terms of what technology offers. Stuff that we can do here, and as long as it is relevant to somebody in the countryside in Scotland or wherever, is going to resonate with them. Those opportunities and those prospects do excite me. But we've got to be relevant to the local environment in the first instance. And I don't think we've, I look back 5-10 years ago, and I used to say that our penetration into the countryside, like you said, in the rural areas and so forth, has been minuscule. We need to be focusing on that and saying to ourselves, how do we deliver content to that part of our population in a manner that is sustainable going forward? I've spoken about the government coming in. The government has capacity to energize, create the right environment for that kind of stuff to happen, so that our people are empowered, are creative and so forth. But your question, I look forward to continue building. When we started with one newspaper in 1996, the Zimbabwe Independent, with 7 people and then 13 people, we didn't think that we would be what we are, employing 400 people. 10 years later, we're now at 200 people. I still believe there's space that, the government of the day has denied us, which I still remain hopeful. Radio, television, whatever technology offers us, one day we're going to play in that space. The government of the day might deny us those things, but governments come and go. We will continue to be ambitious and push the envelope as physically possible.
That point you make, I mean, how relevant are some of these regulations and these licensing requirements when you have the internet, when I can go on my phone and publish and report and post it wherever I want?
It's become a bit, it's going to be difficult for the government to continue to think that they can control. They actually have lost the game. So they have lost that battle. They will continue to focus on us, unfortunately, who are licensed, okay? Anybody else can go out and do whatever we do, but because we are Alpha Media Holdings, we have a newspaper license, we have a broadcast license. If you do ABCD, we're going to come and get those from you. But other people out there are doing stuff that we ought to be doing, and doing it without needing a license from anybody. So slowly, as is happening everywhere, governments are becoming irrelevant. Might I say that where we ought to be, where governments should not be controlling information, we'll ultimately get there, because like I said, in any case, what ought to be happening is that the government ought to be encouraging its people to think in a critical manner and in a creative manner. Unfortunately, our government, the government that Robert Mugabe, passed on to this nation, is one where we believe you control people by controlling what they think and what they say. But dare I say, those days are coming to an end.
And the Independent and AMH will be there to report it when it does happen.
Absolutely. We are here to stay. We've got a staying power. I mean, we have survived over the 25 years, not because any government wanted us to survive, but because by the grace of God and the determination of the people that we've got in the newsroom, the determination of successive editors to do what is right, the support of the advertisers to support the cause that we stand for, the support from the readers who love our content and continue to consume our content in print, online and other platforms. So that's the reason why we continue to exist. We serve a certain need within society. We fulfill a certain purpose within society, and it's not up to government to decide or change that purpose.
And we wish you all the best for the next 25.
Thanks, Farai.
Thank you so much, Trevor.
Thank you.